Welcome back, everyone. Mo Al-Sumidai with the Clinical Trial Vanguard. And we're here at the Viva Clinical Oversight Forum at the Den Plaquarium in Copenhagen. And we're joined by here with Ibrahim Kamstrup-Akkaoui, who is the VP of Business Architecture and Partnerships at Novo Nordisk. Welcome.
Thank you.
So we're going to talk about outsourcing today.
Yeah.
So specifically with R3, because it's a big topic right now.
Mm-hmm.
And the document emphasizes critical thinking and context-driven decision-making over rigid models. And it favors that over those rigid models. So how do you personally determine which functions are strategically essential to keep in-house, where internal judgment is irreplaceable versus those that you can form an external partnership with?
So I think first of all, there needs to be a decision of how do we drive our business in the most sustainable way. When that is determined, then we look at which functions are part of determining or analyzing the outcome of the studies or the programs that we run. And of course, these important decisions are some that you want to keep close. So you can, of course, outsource a lot of the bigger operational bulk of activities and then keep the more critical decision making and analysis in-house.
Mm-hmm. Could you provide me with specific examples of certain functions that you would insource in terms of what types of decisions are to be made versus those that you can outsource?
So typically in the early design phases of the study or your program is something you want to keep close to your strategy and make sure it is very closely linked to what you're trying to achieve with your program. And you can say some of these functions that interact early on in the process is usually mainly within the medical space and biostatistics. And then you can say there are a lot of operational functions that help them execute on the design and the operational activities of clinical study. And those are sometimes easier to outsource to, for example, a CRO or a big partner when you want to outsource a program like we have been trying to do for some time.
Mm-hmm. So one of the biggest messages in R3 is that sponsors retain the ultimate accountability, even when outsourcing. In practice, what functions do you believe become high risk to outsource because accountability gaps tend to emerge, and how do you identify those issues before they surface? And that's also another key point that they make. So you have to identify those risks and issues before they surface.
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, you could outsource pretty much everything, but then again, how does outsourcing tie up with the strategy that you have? And again, what puts you and the program at risk? You can say you might want to consider how you run your safety part of the business, how you make a judgment from a medical perspective for your clinical trial decisions, and also those closely linked to the analysis that you're trying to do. So again, it's a lot about, to me at least, safety, medical, biostatistics are closer to the strategy and part of the decision makers when you want to look at the outcome of your study and program.
Mm-hmm. And outsourcing often creates a layered operational ecosystem. So under the emphasis of R3, in terms of proportional risk-based oversight, which functions do you think are better managed internally because they benefit from direct real-time context, and data, right? Versus those where it's I guess some of the redundancy and standardization makes outsourced execution more efficient?
Yeah. Well, you can say that's one way of looking at it. Of course, sometimes you want to have your data close. Also, if you're running a program where the velocity of the data coming in is important because you want to do very close monitoring of the data that's being collected from the patients, and that should enable you to take fast decisions. So sometimes the functions around keeping the data acquisition and the system monitoring close can be help for these kind of programs. And then there are others where you can wait a bit longer between the readouts of your studies, and that time is not always of essence. So that might be a better opportunity to outsource some more functions.
That makes sense. And R3 stresses the need for sponsors to ensure data integrity and like traceability across the full study lifecycle across all systems.
Yeah.
So what parts of the data flow from collection to monitoring to decision making to safety do you see as too strategically sensitive to externalize, and why?
Well, personally, I've always preferred that we can partner up with CROs, but if they can run on our core infrastructure, that will be optimal. Of course, we can ensure that things are set up the way we are used to using the systems. The readouts that comes out in the same format. The data deliverables, we can help the CRO partner manage much better in our own environment and working with our own standards. So that way we don't delay the process and we ensure that the data quality remains high throughout the study.
And many sponsors now operate in hybrid models with multiple CROs, functional service providers, tech vendors. Which capabilities do you believe are the most at risk of fragmentation when outsourced? And how do you decide what must remain unified within the sponsor's walls?
Well, I'm going to take you back to our system infrastructure because that is critical to how we run our business. So I'm not saying that we can't run on other partners' systems, but again, if you're going to wait to build integrations and once those integrations are up and running, you're going to closely monitor the data because there's always going to be some data issues and potentially missing data. So that might hit your data integrity. And there's just a lot of more controls that needs to be set up and that might complicate your oversight. And you want that oversight to run as smooth as possible to harvest the benefits of actually working with a partner.
And here's what's interesting is that like there was another example earlier during the day where someone was, the last presentation actually, where the medical monitor left, the CRA left, the CTL left, everyone left. Do you think that these new data systems will be able to allow the new employees to then have a glance and know exactly what happened throughout the study's life cycle?
I think that's a really good point, and that's exactly what you want to keep ensuring that, whenever you onboard people, it's easy for them to get on the trial and get into the data, the potential issues and risks that we might have. Not just because there are issues in the setup, but actually because it's a complicated study and things you need to be aware of there. So, of course, you want to keep the documentation around the data, around the decisions as close as possible, or at least that it's facilitated that you can access this information really fast and at all time.
And that supports auditing and that supports sort of Alcoa practices.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly.
And so looking beyond specific providers, what internal competencies do you believe a sponsor should never outsource? Because they define like the scientific integrity and the organizational identity, or like, some of those long-term strategic continuities. What would that be, like specific examples?
Well, again, I think you can basically outsource all functions if you want to. But again, depending on what your strategy is with your program or your trials. So from my experience, it's probably the medical function that you want to keep in-house and oversee the trials from a medical perspective.
Patient safety, yeah. Okay. Well, Ibrahim Kamstrup-Akkaoui from Novo Nordisk, thank you so much for joining us.